At 8:17 a.m., the sky over the city flashed brighter than the sun. Windows shattered miles away, car alarms screamed, and for a split second, the world seemed to freeze. In that moment, millions of people had no idea what was happening. Was it an accident? A missile? A nuclear explosion? And the most important question, what should you do in the first minutes after a nuclear attack? No one ever expects to live through a nuclear attack. For decades, nuclear weapons have existed mostly as distant geopolitical threats discussed in news reports, military briefings, and international treaties. Yet the scientific reality is simple. If a nuclear weapon detonates over or near a city, survival depends largely on knowledge, preparation, and the decisions people make in the first few minutes. Understanding what happens during a nuclear explosion is the first step to understanding how to survive it. A nuclear weapon releases energy through nuclear reactions, either fission, fusion, or a combination of both. In simple terms, atoms split or combine, releasing enormous amounts of energy in fractions of a second. That energy appears in several destructive forms: an intense flash of light and heat, a powerful blast wave, electromagnetic radiation, and radioactive fallout. The first effect people would notice is the flash. A nuclear detonation produces a thermal pulse that can be brighter than the sun. Scientists estimate that within milliseconds of the explosion, temperatures at the center can reach tens of millions of degrees Celsius. This flash can cause temporary blindness even miles away, especially at night. Anyone looking directly at the explosion risks permanent eye damage. That is why one of the most important first reactions, according to emergency preparedness experts in organizations like the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is simple: do not look at the flash. Instead, immediately drop to the ground and cover your eyes. The thermal radiation from a nuclear explosion can ignite fires across large areas. Skin exposed to the flash can suffer severe burns, similar to sunburn, but far more intense. Clothing and nearby materials may catch fire if they absorb enough heat. The next danger arrives seconds later: the blast wave. When the weapon detonates, it creates an enormous pressure wave moving outward faster than the speed of sound. Buildings near the explosion can collapse instantly. Windows shatter miles away. Debris becomes deadly projectiles. The strength of this blast decreases with distance, which means survival chances increase significantly, even a few miles from ground zero. Many people historically survived nuclear blasts simply because they were shielded by buildings or terrain. A powerful example, often studied by scientists, comes from the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Thousands of people survived those explosions because they were inside reinforced structures, behind hills, or even just in basements when the bombs detonated. The physics behind this protection is straightforward. Walls, concrete, earth, and steel absorb and deflect blast energy. Even a simple barrier between a person and the explosion can reduce the force dramatically. After the flash and the blast comes another invisible threat: radiation. Radiation from a nuclear explosion occurs in several forms. Some radiation is released instantly, known as prompt radiation. This includes gamma rays and neutrons emitted during the nuclear reaction itself. However, for most survivors outside the immediate blast zone, the greater danger comes from radioactive fallout. Fallout forms when the explosion lifts dust, soil, and debris high into the atmosphere. These particles become contaminated with radioactive materials produced during the nuclear reaction. As the particles cool, they fall back to the ground, sometimes over areas hundreds of miles away, depending on wind patterns. This fallout can begin reaching the ground within minutes to hours. Radioactive fallout emits ionizing radiation, which damages human cells by breaking molecular bonds in DNA. This can cause radiation sickness, increased cancer risk, and damage to organs depending on the exposure level. The key scientific principle for surviving fallout is known as the time, distance, and shielding rule. Time refers to how long you are exposed to radiation. The longer the exposure, the greater the damage. Distance means the farther you are from radioactive material, the lower the radiation dose. Shielding refers to materials between you and the radiation source. Dense materials like concrete, soil, bricks, and metal reduce radiation exposure dramatically. This is why emergency guidelines emphasize one action above all others: get inside, and stay tuned for information. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention explains that the best protection from fallout is being inside a sturdy building, preferably in a basement or the center of the structure. If you are outside when a nuclear explosion occurs, the first step after the blast wave passes is to find shelter as quickly as possible. The best shelters are underground spaces such as basements, subway stations, or underground parking structures. Thick concrete walls and earth overhead provide excellent radiation shielding. Even if underground shelter is unavailable, the center of a large building can offer significant protection. Large office buildings, schools, and shopping centers often have multiple interior rooms far from windows and exterior walls. These locations reduce radiation exposure by placing multiple layers of material between occupants and the outside environment. One mistake many people imagine making is immediately trying to evacuate the area. In reality, running outside during fallout can expose people to far more radiation than staying inside. Radioactive fallout is most dangerous during the first few hours after a nuclear explosion. The intensity of radiation decreases rapidly with time due to the decay of unstable isotopes. Scientists often describe this using the 7 to 10 rule. For every 7-fold increase in time after the explosion, radiation levels decrease by about a factor of 10. For example, if radiation intensity is 100 units 1 hour after the explosion, it might drop to about 10 units after 7 hours and roughly 1 unit after 2 days. This rapid decline means staying sheltered for at least 24 to 48 hours can significantly reduce radiation exposure. During this time, it is important to avoid bringing contaminated materials inside the shelter. If someone was outdoors during fallout, radioactive dust may cling to their clothing and skin. Removing outer clothing can eliminate up to 90% of contamination.
Clothes should be sealed in a plastic bag and placed away from living areas. After removing contaminated clothing, washing with soap and water helps remove remaining radioactive particles from the skin and hair. However, conditioner should be avoided because it can bind radioactive materials to hair strands. Clean water, if available, should be used to rinse the body thoroughly. Food safety is another concern following a nuclear explosion. Sealed food containers such as canned goods or bottled drinks are generally safe if the exterior is wiped clean. Radiation does not make sealed food radioactive unless contamination physically enters the container. Tap water systems may remain safe in many areas because municipal treatment facilities are often protected infrastructure. However, official guidance from authorities should always be followed. Communication during a nuclear emergency is critical. Battery-powered or hand-crank radios allow people to receive official updates even if power grids and cellular networks fail. Government agencies broadcast instructions regarding evacuation routes, medical assistance, and contamination zones. In the United States, emergency information is often transmitted through the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration Weather Radio Network. Medical effects of radiation exposure depend on the dose absorbed by the body. Low doses may cause no immediate symptoms, but slightly increase long-term cancer risk. Moderate doses can produce radiation sickness, characterized by nausea, vomiting, fatigue, and decreased immune function. High doses damage bone marrow and internal organs, potentially leading to life-threatening illness. However, it is important to understand that many people exposed to moderate levels of radiation survive with proper medical care. The human body can repair some radiation damage over time. Treatments such as potassium iodide tablets may protect the thyroid gland from radioactive iodine if administered soon after exposure. Hospitals and emergency response teams prepare for such scenarios using guidelines developed by organizations including the World Health Organization. Another scientific concern following a nuclear explosion is the electromagnetic pulse, commonly called EMP. A nuclear detonation in the atmosphere can produce a powerful burst of electromagnetic energy capable of disrupting electronics across large regions. Power grids, satellites, and communication systems may temporarily fail. However, most personal survival actions do not depend on advanced electronics. Shelter, water, food, and information from battery-powered devices remain reliable tools. Over the long term, environmental recovery after a nuclear explosion depends on weather, geography, and cleanup efforts. Rain can wash radioactive particles from the atmosphere, concentrating contamination in certain areas while clearing others more quickly. Wind patterns determine where fallout travels. Scientists use atmospheric models to predict these patterns and guide evacuation decisions. Decades after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, both cities were rebuilt and are now thriving urban centers. This demonstrates an important scientific truth. Radioactive contamination does not make areas permanently uninhabitable in most cases. Many radioactive isotopes decay quickly. Others can be removed through soil replacement, decontamination, and natural environmental processes. Psychological resilience is another important factor in survival. Studies of disaster response show that people who remain calm, follow reliable information, and cooperate with others have significantly better outcomes during emergencies. Panic, misinformation, and rushed decisions often increase danger. Preparation also plays a major role. Emergency kits containing water, non-perishable food, flashlights, radios, batteries, and basic medical supplies can sustain people during the first days after a disaster. In many households, these supplies already exist in different forms. The key is keeping them accessible. Families may also create communication plans, deciding how to reconnect if separated during an emergency. Schools, workplaces, and public institutions regularly practice emergency drills for this reason. While the destructive power of nuclear weapons is enormous, scientific analysis consistently shows that survival is possible for large numbers of people outside the immediate blast zone. The difference between life and death often depends not on luck, but on knowledge. Knowing to avoid the flash, knowing to take cover from the blast, knowing to shelter from fallout. These simple actions dramatically increase survival chances. In the first minutes after a nuclear explosion, the situation may feel chaotic and unimaginable. Sirens may sound, communication networks may falter, and the scale of the disaster may not yet be clear. But the physics of radiation, blast waves, and shielding remain constant. Concrete still blocks radiation. Distance still reduces exposure. Time still allows radioactive materials to decay. These scientific realities provide the foundation for survival strategies taught by emergency management experts across the world. In other words, even in the shadow of the most powerful weapon humanity has created, knowledge remains one of the strongest forms of protection. And in those first critical moments, when the sky flashes, the ground shakes, and the world seems to change in an instant, the people who understand what is happening and what to do next stand the greatest chance of surviving the unthinkable.